Okay, so here's a simple formula to change your behavior. And I know this sounds super simple, but it is actually a very powerful formula. You may have heard the saying that you either get what you deserve or you deserve what you get. So in other words, our outcomes are based on how we behave, and our behaviors are based on how we think. If you don't believe me, pay attention over the next week or so to how you feel when certain people treat you a certain way, right? When someone is nice to you, do you feel good? Do you want to be nice to them? Yeah, probably. When someone is not so nice to you, like maybe they're rude to you, or they push you around, or something like that, how does that make you feel? Probably pretty bad. You might even want to fight back or be rude back. Okay, so our outcomes affect how we think and how we feel. And our thoughts and feelings then influence how we behave, which then influences our future outcomes. So it's this positive feedback loop or this negative feedback loop, right? It can go either way depending on how we choose to think about things. So this is where the power of the mind comes in, because we have control over our thinking. We can choose how we think about things, and by changing our thinking, we can then change our feelings, which will then change our behavior, which will then change our outcomes, right? So this formula goes like this: Q equals M times C times E. Okay, so this is actually an equation from social psychology. The Q stands for the quality of our relationships with others. So basically how we get along with other people, how happy we are in our relationships. The M stands for the number of rewards minus the number of costs. So the more rewards and the less cost in a relationship, the happier we are going to be in those relationships. And the C stands for the clarity with which we see the relationship as satisfying. So do we perceive the relationship as being more rewarding than costly? Or do we see the relationship as being more satisfying than dissatisfying? And the E stands for the extent to which we escape from the relationship. So the less we escape from the relationship, the higher the quality of the relationship tends to be. And vice versa, the more we escape from the relationship, the lower the quality of the relationship tends to be. So let us plug in some numbers for each of these variables. Just to make this a little bit more concrete, let's say that in any given day we experience 3 rewards and 1 cost in our relationships, right? Maybe we get 3 positive interactions with people around us, and we experience 1 negative interaction. And then let's say that we see the relationship as being more satisfying than dissatisfying. In other words, we see the overall experience as being more rewarding than costly. So if we use these numbers, we would end up with a pretty high quality relationship, right? But if we were to switch the numbers around, right? So instead of having 3 rewards and 1 cost, let's say that we only had 1 reward and 3 costs. So now we're experiencing 3 negative interactions and only 1 positive interaction. And then still we see the relationship as being more satisfying than dissatisfying, but it's not by as much as before, right? Now we're only seeing it as mildly more rewarding than costly. Well, we would expect the quality of our relationships to go down, right? And now let's say that we switch the numbers again. So now we have 3 rewards and 1 cost, but we see the relationship as being more dissatisfying than satisfying, right? More costly than rewarding. So maybe we're having 3 positive interactions and 1 negative interaction, but we interpret it as being more costly than rewarding. Well, now we would expect the quality of our relationships to go up, right? We would expect to have a pretty positive experience overall. And finally, if we were to flip all the numbers to their opposite, right? So we're only having 1 reward and 3 costs, and we also see the relationship as being more costly than rewarding. Well, now we would expect the quality of our relationship to go down even further, right? So this is basically the formula that influences our thoughts and feelings about things. The reason why I wanted to share this formula with you is because it highlights the importance of our interpretation of events. So sure, our circumstances matter, right? If we're going through a really hard time, like we've lost our job, we're sick, our family is sick, something like that, it's gonna be harder to be optimistic. But it's not impossible, okay? And if we're going through a really easy time, well, it's probably easier to be optimistic. But again, it's not impossible to be pessimistic. So our circumstances certainly play a role, but the way that we interpret our circumstances plays an even bigger role. So let's say that someone cuts you off in traffic, right? What are you gonna think? Are you gonna think, oh, this person must be really reckless, right? Or are you gonna think, wow, they must be really nice and kind, right? Probably not. Probably most of us would think something in between those two, like, oh, this person is a jerk, right? something like that. But there's still a range of interpretations that we could be having about this event. And the way that we interpret that event is going to shape how we feel about it, right? Are we going to feel angry? Are we going to feel upset? Are we going to feel frustrated? Are we going to laugh it off? Our interpretation of the event is going to determine how we feel. And then our feelings are going to determine how we act, which will then determine our outcomes. So for example, let's say that we interpret someone cutting us off in traffic as being intentional, right? As them trying to harm us or trying to make us feel bad or something like that. Well, if we think that that happened, if we believe that that happened, then we're probably going to feel really angry and upset about it. And if we feel really angry and upset about it, then we're more likely to do something rash, right? Maybe we start yelling at the person. Maybe we try to retaliate. Maybe we do something dangerous just to kind of take out our aggression, right? Whereas if we were to interpret the same event as being accidental, right? Oh, this person didn't mean to cut me off. They probably didn't see me or something like that. Then we're probably not going to feel as angry, right? Because if we don't think that this was intentional, we probably won't feel as much anger. And if we don't feel as much anger, then we're probably not going to do something rash, right? We're probably going to be okay. Now, this is not to say that one interpretation is better than the other. Sometimes it is better to feel angry. For example, if someone is hurting you, it's probably a good thing to feel angry. You probably want to do something about it. You don't want to just sit back and accept it. But if someone is just accidentally bumping into you, well, it's probably not that big of a deal, right? There's no harm done. So in that case, it's probably better to interpret it as accidental rather than intentional. Another way to illustrate this concept is to think of life as a game of basketball, right? So if we're playing basketball, we might miss a few shots, right? Some of the shots might go in, some of them might go out. And if we keep track of the number of shots that go in versus the number of shots that go out, we'll probably find that more of them go out than go in, right? Just like in life, we experience more negative emotions than positive emotions. It's just the way that life is. It's just the way that we're wired. But if we think about basketball as being a game of 24 shots, right? If we miss 15 of those shots, but we make 9 of them, we would say that that's pretty good, right? We won the game. But if we started thinking about basketball as being a game of 240 shots and we missed 150 of them, but made 90, well, we would say that we really sucked, right? Even though the raw numbers are exactly the same, our interpretation of the numbers changes how we feel about it. If we think about the glass as being half empty, well, we're going to feel worse about it. If we think about the glass as being half full, well, we're going to feel better about it. So this is why it's important to be careful about how we interpret things. We don't want to interpret things in a way that makes us feel really bad, right? We want to interpret things in a way that helps us feel empowered, that helps us feel capable of doing something about the situation, that helps us feel like we can improve the situation. So the takeaway from all this is that we need to focus on what we can control, which is our thinking. We need to focus on reframing the way that we think about things, on reframing the way that we interpret things, right? Because that's ultimately what's going to determine how we feel. And if we can learn to reframe our thoughts, then we can learn to feel better. And if we can learn to feel better, then we can learn to behave better, which will then lead to better outcomes, which will then lead to better thoughts, which will then lead to better feelings. And it's just this positive feedback loop. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And thanks for watching.